You don't have to double fist with champagne and beer. I just don't drink beer, and I'm very demanding at the end of the day.
It's a long panel.
Yeah, exactly. You should have both at this point. All right, so let's get started. Guys, what is the most interesting thing you heard today, and anything you want to call total bullshit on?
I will call bullshit. The first keynote where Dina said advertising creates no value is just empirically not true. I don't know where she's coming from with that, but there are like 40 businesses you could point to that suggest that's false.
Just 40?
Yeah,
Off the top of my head. If you gave me Bing access, at least 50.
Anyone else? You guys weren't really listening, were you?
I'm sorry.
What was that, Mike?
I was just saying he made a nerdy joke, but I will talk about my panel. The friendly nature of Twitter and these content creating companies, I think like it's kind of bullshitty, just because like I think CNN sort of like has to wonder how people are really sort of absorbing their news these days, right? And like they're really pushing this whole and this actually worries me as a journalist, but they're really pushing this like we are the curators, we are the people that have this sort of authority, but like is the power like still completely in this sort of this estate, the journalism estate, or is it sort of shifting, and does that make them fully comfortable?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's like I call mild bullshit, but not like total bullshit.
To steal someone's bullshit, we were talking in the back room just now about my panel on dating, and some of the things that we discussed was the idea of how difficult it's going to be, I think, for some of these startups that are looking to broaden or to pivot into, for example, if Tinder was to go into the professional relationships world, or if Bang with Friends was supposed to be blank with friends, or hang with friends, or all of that. I think it's going to be very hard. I think once you kind of build out a particular use case, especially when you're defined by dating, it's very tough, I think, to really try to expand your market. And I think for a lot of these apps in general, when you're looking also on issues like monetization, which might be the catalyst for why they'd want to do this, I think dating and monetization and such is a very tricky challenge for them probably going forward. So.
Thanks, Evelyn, for stealing that.
I missed your panel, but I have to assume everyone points at Facebook, though, that started out as like a pseudo dating site and then evolved into, we have to connect with the app developer so that I can get into our Forbes app.
I think arguably, like, Facebook wasn't really a dating site, though. I mean, at its core, I remember the early days of college when someone sent me an email and said, my friend Mark is starting the site and you should join. And I think at that point it was still about your close relationships and establishing that. And you could say, though, that Facebook today is pivoting into, for example, Twitter with their hashtags and such, and we'll see how that goes. But I think, when you're specifically a dating app, and then when you've defined that niche even further, going into very casual dating, I think it's hard to convince users.
Is that your politically correct way of saying bang? Casual dating?
Casual dating.
I'm going to keep it classy.
So to flip that around and to recast it in the positive sense, I think the one thing we have seen, especially in the past year with a lot of social networking, is the kind of cultivation of kind of smaller social networks like Vine and Instagram before that, the Asian app Line, Snapchat. We're seeing kind of people move away from spending a lot of time on the big social networks, Facebook and Twitter to some extent, and into kind of these smaller subsets. And I don't know if people are wanting to expand beyond that. I don't know how far you can expand beyond Bang with Friends. But I think that there is something to be said for kind of investing and building these smaller communities, because you're going to get kind of more avid users in them.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of value in that. And I think Zuckerberg even said, there was an interview about what he thinks is the next most important trend, and he said sharing within small groups. And so I think there's considerable value in that. I'm not saying that these apps themselves can't be valuable, but I think really trying to change the definition of your app is a very tough thing, especially in this category. But anyways, I'll stop talking.
You guys have already talked about dating and about a lot of the different things we discussed today, content. Is there anything that social discovery shouldn't or won't impact, in your opinion, as journalists? Like, is it really everything now? Will everything be social in some way?
Yeah, I think this whole thing is kind of over, and you need to come up with a new conference for next year.
It's great. It's really great feedback. Yeah.
Well,
We tried to keep it broad for this very reason, Ryan. God, 2 years and that's it?
what was the social network that was built around your credit card purchases? Oh, yeah. You remember talking about? What was it? No, it was the fuck
one where
company
they
guy.
shared
It.
everything you bought.
Blippy.
Yeah.
Blippy, yeah. So Blippy started up. The whole idea was you share your purchases, and it just turned out absolutely no one was into that. So maybe that app's time will come. But
I would add pornography to that.
yeah,
Probably is not right for.
porn, we've not seen a lot of social porn, although Tumblr, in this weird way, like Tumblr really has more porn, according to what other people have told me, than almost any social network out there. And there are social loops in there. There is like hearting and reblogging, messaging, like everything that we associate with social networking is happening in the Tumblr porn world.
I think Hunter Moore of Is Anyone Up is trying to build a social network around kind of humiliating porn. I don't know how successful it is, but I know he's trying.
Wait, who? What?
Wait, humiliating
This is the URL.
I gotta tell you about this guy. It's crazy.
Well, speaking of porn, I was waiting for that opener. Chris mentioned that this is kind of the new normal during his entertainment panel. Is there too much, or does this digital generation, does it not matter? I mean, are they literally going to share everything? What's your advice to your future grandchildren on like watch out for the NSA, don't post, don't bang all your friends?
I generally think that teenagers and young people just do stupid shit. Like when I was a young person, I posted a lot of stupid shit on the internet, and thank God, like.
You still post a lot of stupid shit on the internet.
Thank God I get paid to do it now.
That was good.
But I think that the internet's memory isn't as long as we'd like to think. You've got to look really hard to find those skeletons.
I think maybe people are getting a little better at learning how to negotiate different identities and sort of adopt different identities. And I think that, there may be less permanence attached to these identities in the future than we kind of think they have right now, or maybe easier to find ways to kind of reinvent yourself under an alias.
And also, I mean, society is shifting as well. I mean, what is an acceptable social norm is different now than it was 20 years ago, and I think that's going to be different again 20 years in the future. Maybe it'll be perfectly acceptable to send a porn video to your boss in 20 years' time. Who knows?
We can hope, Chris.
Now, because I do that all the time.
I can hope. That's
I
what I
also
keep
don't
telling
think it's
her.
just young people who post stupid things on the internet. I mean, I think this is an equal age opportunity.
I just want to clarify the question. So are you asking me if there's such a thing as too much porn? Because if so, I don't think there is.
Right. You're right. I should have been more direct, JP. I'm sorry. You're right. There isn't. How is that possible? So speaking of more like the safety angles, then. So we talked a lot about safety and government regulations during Ryan's transportation panel. What should be the government's responsibility versus the users when it comes to this stuff? Like when are we going to say like, yeah, you went online and you did some stupid stuff and it bit you in the ass. It was kind of your fault.
Are you asking me? I mean, as it relates to my panel, I honestly think that, the safety issue, I mean, the nice thing is that there is social and there is identity as it applies to these services. I think that the public safety issue because of that, is a little bit of a red herring. Specifically when we talk about transportation and
When you're getting in someone's car, I mean that's a different story than chatting with someone online. I mean I think that there's probably a good case to be made for regulating actual real world interactions. Don't you think?
But when you think about it, I mean the fact that we have these systems that are linked to identity that are inherently social. I think that in a way that really does make things more safe because there's a person's face and identity and profile attached to the car that they're driving, whereas you get in a cab and I don't know the last time you actually looked at the person's medallion number or their name or whatever. If you had an issue in that cab, like who do you report that to or how do you actually do that? There's not a real good way to do it if you just like pick up a cab on the street.
So you're saying that there shouldn't be any role in terms of government or, for example, the requirement of insurance for these companies and their drivers?
I'm not saying that there isn't a role for government. I think that the thing is, a lot of these companies are doing a better job than the government is in, doing background checks and having a system for identifying problems. Because, those guys who are cab drivers or whatever, they get renewed once a year, and you're not really sure where those calls go when you have a problem. So I don't know. I mean, I'd much rather be able to put my crappy rating in an app and know that there's instant feedback than make a phone call to some system where I don't know what happens afterward.
I would say these companies have also done a far better job at assessing demand than the government regulated sector has, right? I mean, I think many of us remember the dark days before Uber and Sidecar and Lyft trying to hail a cab on the street in San Francisco. There just were not enough medallions to ensure that you could ever get a cab on a Saturday night, or that even a cab that you ordered would ever arrive at your house. So, I mean, I think to that extent, I am glad that these companies have been able to step around at least that regulation.
Guys, can we start joking again? This is
this
is kind of a downer.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, so interesting question from Twitter. Rooms Inc. asks, what do you think about organizing all the possible discoveries in one place? What if you just had one place where you could discover everything?
Yeah, it's called the internet, right?
No, but isn't that Facebook? I mean, doesn't Facebook own our identity right now? At least they want to. Everything is Facebook Connect, and I mean, even with stuff that has alternate login, really, it's just easy to click that big blue button, or easier.
I tweeted this idea this morning while I was watching the Tinder and tag discussion for an app that would let you discover dating apps by swiping left and right on the ones you liked and didn't like. And somebody else was like, well, yeah, but then you'd need an app to find all those apps, and you could swipe. So I think there might be something there in terms of overall discoverability.
Yeah, I think you should make that.
I think there is that desire for the one layer to rule them all.
Well, I mean, going back to the point that I made earlier, I mean, one of the reasons that Snapchat became popular is because it's not Facebook and it doesn't live there. So I think there's something to be said for people, Facebook is that layer, Twitter is that layer, but there's some pent-up demand out there for people wanting to, hide in a cave somewhere away from those.
For instance, Path is where Mike Isaac puts his stuff that he doesn't want me to see.
I recently defriended him on Path, and he has not gotten over it. I think that scares me. I think the idea of being one place to discover everything is terrifying. I think that's why there is companies like, I think Facebook and Google do this, but they have some sort of data portability options. Essentially, you can sort of take some of your stuff and move to other services. I don't want to actually say that Facebook and Google do that, because you would probably know that better than I do. But just that's what these companies want. Facebook wants to lock in all my photos in its service, right? Google Plus just did a lot of different updates, whoever uses Google Plus, but Google Plus just did a lot of different updates to make it super easy for me to not even have to worry about combing through all my photos and push it out to all these other services. They just want it to be the repository for everything. So I don't like that. I don't like being beholden to one thing, especially if something decides to pull up MySpace and I lose everything or whatever. But
yeah, I don't think that a monopoly at all, essentially, which is what we're talking about on the interest graph, is really healthy, right? I mean, whether it's Facebook that wants this or Google, you don't want one specific entity which has its own interests kind of defining what apps or what things you should be using, because there, at times that conflict with the developer community or with probably your own interests. So, while it seems like a very convenient option, there's a lot of devil in the details kind of baked in there.
Sure.
At the same time, you should always assume that wherever you're going, whatever cave you're trying to hide in, it can eventually be linked back to your real identity. Like Lindsay Mills, Edward Snowden's girlfriend, whose stuff, it was pseudonymous, but immediately became linked to her real identity and to him.
Really? I missed that too.
What?
That's a day.
They found her? They found this.
Was that on Reddit?
Forbes for the win.
Apparently you don't read the Daily Mail.
No. Yeah.
Nothing is safe from journalists. That's the moral.
No, I mean, it's an interesting point that there's been a lot more vigilantism. I mean, we saw that with Reddit around the Boston bombings. And also, I mean, something that's been blowing up on Facebook today rather randomly. A girl overheard a guy, laughing about how his wife has not discovered, all these women he's been sleeping with. That picture has been now reshared, I think, 600,000 times of this guy. I mean, we're rapidly heading into this world where because of Facebook, you cannot get away with any crimes or any, there's a whole layer of people out there who will hunt you down. And
whether you're guilty or not.
Yeah, exactly.
This turned dark as shit.
It's vigilantism.
Wait until we're all wearing Google Glass.
Yeah.
Yes, even worse.
I mean, I also think the idea of a one size rule them all is, it's also highly improbable, right? I mean, different use cases, different social networks, different social sites. If I want to, I don't know, catch up on an acquaintance from like 5 years ago, Facebook. If I want to be Mike Isaac, I guess I share embarrassing things on Path. If I want to date, Grindr.
Mike Isaac.
Grindr, it's back.
And I use date loosely.
Full circle. And so a little bit, we talked a little bit again about the creepiness factor of these various offerings. So, will there ever be a time when we're all dead and gone that no one is creeped out by it? Like right now, there's always certain people who are like, I would never sleep on someone's couch. I would never stay at an Airbnb. I'm always going to get a hotel room. I would never, lend someone else my house. Will that eventually go away, or will there always be these people that hide in the hills and aren't into it?
This is why I love Paul Davison so much. Is he still in the? Because he's back there. Because this guy honestly believes that someday being all connected and knowing like everything about the person nearby is going to be a huge benefit. And I personally, that like creeps me out. But like, I don't know. Will that be a natural thing for our grandkids to like just be able to open an app and know like who the people in the first two rows are here?
Yes.
It's got to be voluntary, though, right? I mean, the thing that creeps me about the whole NSA thing is it's, if you volunteer and you opt into sharing, yes, I get it that there are people out there that are fine with everyone looking through everything they've ever posted online. And I'm surprised at how many people are telling me that in the conversations I've had about NSA. But those people exist and they're out there and they're growing. But, it's got to be voluntary. I don't want, the government doing that, unbeknownst to me or without my volunteering.
For years. Well, I guess there has to be a distinction. Are you referring to also the Verizon AT&T orders, or are you referring to kind of the stuff around Prism?
Both.
Yeah, so I would consider the AT&T, Verizon stuff actually more disconcerting on that point. All the stuff around Prism, I mean, from what I understand, for many years, like that's what the government has been doing in the cases of court orders, right? And in Prism, it's foreign targets, specifically those who are involved with nuclear proliferation or with cyber threats and such. So it's almost like, well, do we want to dismantle the system that we've put in place for acquiring this information for legal cases and such, right? For issues of national security. I mean, I think it's a really difficult balance, and that's what it's great that there's this public debate about it now, because I think that we, Doug and I think many people didn't really know to what extent the government could have access if they needed to. So now it's just a question of like, what appetite do we have for that, and how do we balance that against like national security issues? But
is the idea that the government's so slow and there are so many really bad people that the paranoid stoner probably has nothing to worry about? That they're actually not watching him?
Sure. I mean, it's hard though, right? I mean, no one wants to be a random anomaly that gets kind of caught up in, a case or a situation where there's suspicious details kind of that they're wrapped in, and all of a sudden, they get thrown in jail, and all of their emails from 1999 get dredged up or whatever it is, and all of a sudden, they're on the hook for this. I think, that was what, Snowden was talking about in his interview with The Guardian when he was saying that, you never know, all these things that could have been innocent interactions become a mosaic that pin you for something else down the line. So yeah, that's a fear. But then, in the case of the Boston Marathon bombers or what have you, you probably like do whatever you can to find those guys, right? So it's a really tough call.
The only reason that Prism is a story is because the government didn't tell us about it, right? If it had been buried in some law somewhere, which everything else post-Patriot Act has been, we wouldn't have blinked an eye because they could have just said, hey, yeah, it was right out there. But the fact that there's this narrative of there's this guy, he's a leaker, he's hiding in Hong Kong, that's why Prism is a big deal. And I think that speaks to what all of this social discovery, the line that you're looking for of when does this become creepy. It's like, do we get told about it in advance? If we do, I think on the whole, people are fine with it.
Within the community of people that follow this, I think people kind of knew that something like this was happening. It was discussed, but we never had like a really ugly PowerPoint describing it to point to before.
That's what people are offended by, is the ugly PowerPoint.
Well, it is actually legal, right? I mean, the Patriot Act does authorize exactly this and more. The thing that troubles me about Prism and also about sort of social discovery in the highlight kind of manner is the asymmetry of it. And I think maybe I'm unusual, but it bothers me that somebody at the NSA is collecting a bunch of information. There's absolutely no oversight or insight into exactly what they're doing. And similarly with social discovery in a social context, like it's not necessarily creepy to me that you might be able to look out at the audience and know everything about the first 2 rows of people, assuming that like that information goes back and forth, right? So that they know that. So.
Well, it's all opt-in, and it's all what you choose to share. I mean, that's the idea is that all this information that we're sharing, like we derive some value out of it.
Well, it is until it isn't. I mean, you might be you might be sharing your photos on Instagram, geotagged, but not quite realize until somebody creates an app that shows exactly where those photos are, and they can follow you around through your day. You might not realize the import of that until somebody actually uses that information in a certain way, right? So there's no telling how much information we're giving off that could be used in ways that, even though we have ostensibly clicked the I agree to your terms of service link, we don't actually know how that'll be used.
I think that's all true, and yet at the same time, this feels like the place in social media where norms change the fastest. Like, do you guys remember the outcry when Facebook introduced the news feed? It was like they had repealed the Bill of Rights, right? like people were like freaking out, and yet it wound up being insanely popular, fueled this amazing Facebook growth, and now Facebook is what it is today.
I think
and there could be a similar case to be made. It's like, well, is there symmetry there? How is this information going to be used? Like all these same concerns were voiced, and yet the vast majority of people got over them.
Yeah, I think that the better example is probably Beacon, right? They rolled this thing out in 2008 where you share the things that you're watching and reading and whatever. It just happened seamlessly, and there was this huge outcry, and everybody was creeped out by it. And then 4 years later, they introduced the exact same thing, and we're all cool with it, right? We just click the social on button and go to town, and no one gives a shit. So, I mean, it's just kind of cultural norms catching up with the technology.
Yeah. And none of that is to say that we shouldn't care. It's just that by and large we don't, I think.
And so kind of where is that line in discovery? People want it to be easy. They want it to do the work for them, but they don't want it to go too far. So it's clearly not something that every single user can agree on. So how can a company build to that need then if people can't agree on what's cool and what's not, what goes too far?
I think most people don't care. I think the solution is to build up 100,000 users before you show any journalists, and then the journalists will be like, all these people like it, must be cool.
If the
You heard it here first, everyone. That's how you get to VentureBeat. It must be cool.
If the NSA had been really smart, they would have founded Facebook, right? I mean, the amount to which you can get people to agree to share their own stuff is just amazing. So it's just I'll share.
Maybe they did found Facebook.
Sure. Maybe they did, Chris. Maybe
they did. Yeah, tinfoil hats, everyone.
Yeah, they should have just had a better.
That was off the record.
If they had a better slide deck, we wouldn't be so upset about it. We're like, that shitty slide.
Oh,
exactly.
Speaking of a better slide deck, you guys are all content creators. We talked a lot about curation today. You guys are professional writers, journalists. Who are we going to trust in the future to curate our content other than obviously journalists like you?
I feel like when a big event happens now, everyone turns to Reddit. to see who's, like, when the Boston Marathon bombings happened, people went to Reddit because of the crowdsourced kind of gathering of information.
How well
and
did
I find
that
that
work
very
out?
interesting. But I mean, in terms of actual breaking news, Reddit was one of the better places to go, I thought. Not in terms of let's figure out who did this. I'm not ready to shut down the police force and have Reddit take over for that.
Yeah, I think there's just, particularly with Reddit, there's a kind of very flexible sense of what is accurate, right? So when they were throwing up every particular possibility of who could have been the bomber, you can kind of read that with like this grain of salt, right? And even when they were doing kind of the second by second, really just trying to chronicle what was going on when they were cornering down in this one town. There was constantly things that were being fixed and corrected as like process journalism, I guess is what they call it. But you just kind of accept it because of the value that you're getting of feeling like it's more real time. And I noticed that Reddit consistently, I was following Reddit and the journal and other things, but I was following Reddit very religiously towards the end because when it was reaching that climactic moment, and I was trying to toggle between the news stations, and I felt like it was a lot of what the news stations was offering was just kind of fluff and waiting for things to happen. Meanwhile, there was all these interesting details coming out, and some of them turned out not to be true, and some of them were very true. But it was just fascinating to watch that drama play out in real time.
It's interesting that CNN made like 1 or 2 mistakes and it destroyed their reputation for like in a huge way, whereas Reddit, we're like, it wasn't very accurate, but it was actually great.
But Reddit is not a journalism
Reddit's not CNN,
Reddit is
right.
not a journalism organization.
Yeah.
And this is what's
Yes.
weird is that there's been some slippage because I think journalists feel like they're competing with Reddit, and so they want to get the information out first. So they'll put unverified things out on Twitter, and I think that's so irresponsible.
I think we're increasingly competing with original sources. So in the manhunt and the very last stages of the Boston bombing case, the coolest and most informative source that I found was somebody posted a link to the police scanner in that area when he's in the boat and everything. And I think my friend just emailed it to me, but it probably got to my friend through Facebook or something like that. So I think more and more we're competing with original sources, like raw sources of news and information, and these social channels are helping filter everybody to those. So it's our job as curators to try to compete with that to some extent, or help
also to be
people
the
make
next
sense
level,
of that.
but be the next filter.
Right.
So there's the raw
I mean,
information.
I think that the medium keeps shifting, right? I mean, first it was newspapers competing against blogs, and then it was blogs competing against Twitter, and now it's like everybody competing against Reddit. And I'm really curious, like, what the next Reddit is, like what that next platform is where we discover, I don't know, content, where we discover news, where, whatever happens. Like, I was joking about this, I guess at like some conference, like, are they going to have Redditor badges? Just like a few years ago, 5 years ago, they had blogger badges because that was the difference between someone who is a real journalist and someone who's just a blogger. And I imagine that, like, as time shifts, these platforms will have more of an air of legitimacy, the same way that Twitter does now. Reddit will tomorrow, and then whatever the next thing is, we'll kind of cast our eyes down at it, and then 3 years later, it's like, yeah, that's kind of legitimate.
Yeah, and that what's next is a great cocktail hour topic to begin with, because I've been a hard ass about keeping people on time all day. I better do the same for myself. Final question, everybody, one word answer, starting here, going in a circle. Are you hunted or hunter? Go.
Definitely hunter.
Always the hunter.
Hunter.
Bang with friends.
I totally missed this part of the day. So
Sean from Tinder was saying everybody's either the hunted or a hunter.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, I'm totally hunted all the time.
Hunter.
I think it's our job to be hunters, guys. Come on.
Yeah, if I have to choose, hunter.
I think Ryan sums it up.
Yeah. I work in PR, and you guys are all hunted, so. No. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, guys. You guys are awesome. Stay up here. here a
is.
second and they'll I think you're supposed to talk now.
Oh, all right. That's how the day is ending, is just with my mic falling out of my pants. Fantastic. Well, hey, thanks everybody. I hope you had a great time with Glimpse. Was it all right? Did you have an all right time? All right, fantastic. Thank you to all my fellow panelists, to Julie. We have a cocktail hour now sponsored by Inner Circle Labs, which is again up the stairs, yes? And in the restaurant or over there?
Just upstairs.
Just upstairs. Go upstairs, have some drinks, mingle, chat. Thanks for coming. See you next year.
Open bar starts now.